The sky broke open on a Tuesday. It started as a shadow. A dark circle appeared over the Atlantic Ocean, growing wider with each passing second. People on the eastern coast of the Americas and the western coast of Africa saw it first. They pointed at the sky. They took pictures. They screamed. The object was the size of a small moon. It pushed through Earth's upper atmosphere like a giant stepping into a puddle, and the clouds curled away from it in great spiraling rings. It did not fall. It did not orbit. It simply stopped, hanging in the sky as if gravity meant nothing to it. Within minutes, every military satellite, every telescope, every radar station on Earth was locked onto the same thing. It was a ship, and it belonged to the Thyral Dominion. In the year 2187, humanity had spread beyond Earth. There were colonies on Mars, research stations on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and mining operations scattered across 3 star systems. Humans had touched the edges of faster-than-light travel. They had made contact with alien traders. They had heard whispers of the Galactic Concordance, the great alliance of 4,000 species that had ruled the Orion arm of the Milky Way for over 600,000 years. Humanity knew it was not alone in the universe, but it had never truly understood how small it was. Until now. The broadcast came 30 minutes after the ship appeared. Every screen, every speaker, every device capable of receiving a signal was taken over at once. A face appeared. It was not human. It was long and pale, with deep-set eyes that glowed faintly gold. The skin looked like cracked marble. The creature was impossibly tall. When it spoke, its voice was calm and flat, like someone reading a shopping list. I am Arbiter Vashan of the Thyral Dominion, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Concordance. The species known as humanity has been assessed and classified as a Stage 2 emergent threat. Your rate of technological growth, your territorial expansion, and your biological aggression have triggered the Silence Protocol. You are given 1 galactic cycle, equal to 90 of your planet's days, to comply with the following terms. The terms were simple. Destroy all weapons. Abandon all colonies beyond Earth's moon. Submit every living human to genetic modification that would remove all aggressive impulses permanently. In exchange, humanity would be allowed to continue existing on Earth under permanent concordant supervision. The broadcast ended. The ship hung in the sky and said nothing more. The world went mad. Governments issued emergency statements. Militaries went to full alert. People flooded the streets in every major city, some in protest, some in prayer. The United Earth Coalition, the governing body that loosely held humanity's scattered colonies together, called an emergency session within hours. Leaders argued. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to negotiate. None of them could agree on anything. Secretary General Adaeze Okafor sat in the back of the chamber and listened to all of it. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and short gray hair. She had served in the UEC for 22 years. She had been Secretary General for 6. She was not the kind of person who raised her voice, and she did not raise it now. She waited until the shouting died down, and then she spoke. I need everyone in this room to understand something, she said. Her voice was steady and low. They are not offering us a choice between life and death. They are offering us a choice between 2 kinds of death. The room went quiet. She pulled up a file on the central display. It was a historical record, pieced together from intercepted alien communications, black market data purchases, and decades of intelligence work. It showed the fates of species that had accepted the Silence Protocol in the past. Every single one of them had been genetically pacified as promised, and every single one of them had gone extinct within a few generations. Without aggression, without drive, without the fire that pushed a species to struggle and grow, they simply faded away. Their populations shrank, their cultures collapsed, They became quiet, obedient, and then they were gone. 311 species, all silent, all forgotten. Surrender is not survival, Okafor said. It is slow extinction, with a smile on our faces. She looked around the room. She saw fear in every pair of eyes. She understood it. She felt it too. But fear was not the same as defeat. There is a third option, she said. She entered a code into her personal terminal. Across the solar system, in hidden facilities buried deep under ice and rock and ocean, machines that had been sleeping for 40 years began to wake up. Okafor had not built these machines. The woman who held her position 3 decades ago had started the project, and the one before her had laid the groundwork. For over 40 years, a secret initiative known only to a handful of people had been preparing for the exact moment when the galaxy came to kill humanity. They called it Project Prometheus. We are not going to surrender, Okafor said. We are not going to beg, and we are not going to throw ourselves against their fleet and die in some glorious last stand. We are going to do what humans have always done when the world tells us we are finished. She paused. We are going to cheat. 600 million kilometers away, deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, something enormous powered on. Sensors that had been dark for decades lit up in sequence, one after another, like a row of eyes opening for the first time. The facility was vast, carved into the rock beneath the ocean, and it hummed with a sound that was felt more than heard. Across every human colony, in apartments and barracks and laboratories, certain people received a message on devices they had carried for years without ever being called. Engineers, scientists, soldiers, diplomats, people who had been recruited, trained, and told to wait. Some of them had waited so long they had almost forgotten what they were waiting for. The message was short. Prometheus is awake. They read it. They put down whatever they were holding. They kissed their families, and they went to work. Above Earth, the Firal ship hung in the sky like a closed fist. Arbiter Voshin stood on its bridge and looked down at the small blue planet below. 47 times he had delivered the silence protocol to 47 different species. Some had fought, some had cried, some had tried to run. All of them had ended the same way. He felt nothing as he watched the humans scramble. He expected nothing from them. They were animals. Clever animals, perhaps, but animals all the same. In 90 days, they would submit or they would burn. It did not matter to him which one they chose. He turned away from the window and returned to his work. He did not notice the faint tremor in the data streaming from the outer solar system. He did not see the tiny spike in energy readings from the asteroid belt. He did not know that beneath the ice of Europa, something was breathing for the first time. He would learn soon enough. The galaxy thought it was funny. On a space station orbiting a blue giant star, 4,000 light-years from Earth, a Thyral diplomat gave an interview to a galactic news service. The interviewer, a creature that looked like a tall insect made of glass, asked him what he thought of humanity's chances. The diplomat smiled. At least he made the expression that passed for a smile among his kind. They have spirit, he said. So did the Vilhari. We do not remember what the Vilhari looked like anymore. The interview was broadcast across 3,000 star systems. Billions of beings watched it and laughed or made whatever sound their species used for amusement. On the Galactic Forum, the official governing body of the Concordance, humanity's situation was listed as a minor administrative matter. It was placed between a trade dispute about mineral rights and a request to reclassify a species of space-dwelling jellyfish. Nobody debated it. Nobody questioned it. The silence protocol had been used 311 times. It had never failed. Why would this time be any different? Back on Earth, the humans gave them every reason to believe it would not be. The performance was perfect. Ambassadors from the United Earth Coalition appeared before the Thyral command ship and begged for more time. Their voices cracked, their hands shook. Politicians went on camera and screamed at each other about whether to surrender or fight. Protests filled every major city. People held signs. People wept. On Mars, a colony governor publicly announced she was preparing to surrender her entire settlement and pleaded with others to do the same. It was all a lie. Every trembling ambassador, every crying politician, every screaming protester who appeared on a broadcast that the Firel could intercept was playing a role. The real work was happening in silence, in places the Firel did not know existed, carried out by people whose names appeared in no official record. Project Prometheus had 4 layers, and each one was more dangerous than the last. The first layer was called the Swarm. For the past 10 years, human ships disguised as mining vessels had been seeding the asteroid belt with tiny machines. Each machine was smaller than a grain of sand. Each one could build copies of itself from raw materials. They had been multiplying quietly in the dark spaces between rocks, feeding on metal and ice, growing in number from millions to billions to trillions. Now they were awake, and they were building, not weapons, something stranger. Something the galaxy had never seen before. A computational network made of trillions of tiny minds, spread across millions of kilometers of empty space. A brain the size of a solar system. The second layer was called the Mirror. 15 years ago, a human intelligence team had managed to steal a piece of Firel faster-than-light technology during a black market deal on a station at the edge of concordant space. The theft had cost 4 agents their lives. The technology had been taken to a hidden laboratory on Titan and studied for over a decade. The human scientists did not simply copy it. They asked questions the Firel had never thought to ask. They pushed the technology in directions its creators had never imagined. The result was something new. The Firel STL system could move ships across space. The human version could move information, instantly, to every corner of the galaxy at once. The third layer was called the Signal. Deep in the outer reaches of the solar system, far beyond the orbit of any planet, a communications array had been quietly transmitting for 7 years. It was not aimed at any species in the concordance. It was aimed at the regions beyond the concordance's borders. The places marked on galactic maps with warnings and silence. Places the concordance had sealed off long ago. Something lived out there. The concordance was afraid of it. Humanity did not know what it was. They sent their message anyway. The fourth layer had no official name. The people who worked on it called it Echoes. Over the course of 40 years, human intelligence operatives had tracked down and recovered fragments of data from 11 species that the concordance had destroyed. Scraps of code, pieces of technology, broken records of scientific discoveries that had been made and then erased when their creators were wiped out. One species had developed a shielding technology that could bend light around a ship like water flowing around a stone. Another had discovered a way to generate gravity wells that could trap a fleet in place. A third had been working on a weapon that could disable electronic systems across an entire star system in a single pulse. Each of these species had been killed before they could use what they had made. Humanity found their work, pieced it together, and finished what they started. 11 dead civilizations, 11 sets of last ideas, all of them carried forward by the species that refused to die. On day 42 of the countdown, Ambassador Kofi Asante was sent to the Firel command ship to negotiate. He was a calm man with a deep voice and steady hands. He had been a diplomat for 30 years. He had talked down terrorists, brokered peace between warring colonies, and once convinced a room full of armed soldiers to put down their weapons with nothing but words. But nothing in his career had prepared him for Arbiter Vashon. The Arbiter received him in a chamber that was deliberately designed to make visitors feel small. The walls were covered in carvings that depicted the history of the Thyral Dominion, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Voshan sat in a chair that looked like a throne, and he looked down at Asante the way a person might look at a fly that had landed on their dinner table. "You may speak," Voshan said. Asante spoke. He asked for an extension. He presented arguments. He cited galactic law. He appealed to reason and mercy and self-interest. He did everything a desperate diplomat would do. And while he talked, a device hidden in the lining of his coat did its real work. It was a quantum-entangled surveillance node, no larger than a button. It bonded with the communication array in Voshan's chamber, and began copying every signal that passed through it. Voshan listened to Asante's arguments with the patience of someone watching rain fall. When Asante finished, the Arbiter leaned forward. "I personally oversaw the extinction of the Vilhari," Voshan said. His voice was flat. "They were a beautiful species. They sang to each other across the void between stars. When we came for them, they sang to us too. They thought their songs might move us. I listened to their singing as their worlds burned. I felt nothing then. I feel nothing now." He leaned back. "Your 90 days will not be extended." Asante nodded. He thanked the Arbiter for his time. He walked out of the chamber with his back straight and his face calm. He boarded his shuttle. The door closed. The shuttle pulled away from the Thyral ship. And then his hands began to shake. His aide, a young woman named Lieutenant Reyes, noticed. "Sir, are you all right?" Asante looked down at his trembling fingers. He closed them into fists. He thought about Voshan's golden eyes and the absolute emptiness behind them. He thought about the Vilhari and their songs. He thought about 311 species that had been erased from existence by a creature that felt nothing. "I looked into the eyes of something that has killed worlds and felt nothing," Asante said quietly. "And I realized something." "What?" Reyes asked. He should be the one who is afraid. Back in the asteroid belt, the swarm had been building for 60 days. What it had constructed was vast. It stretched across thousands of kilometers of space, hidden among the rocks and dust, and it was growing larger every hour. On day 60, it became large enough to cast a gravitational shadow, a tiny one, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the orbits of nearby asteroids by a fraction of a degree. The Thyral sensors picked it up. A technician on the command ship flagged the anomaly and sent it up the chain. It reached Arbiter Voshan's desk that evening. He read the report. For the first time in the 90-day countdown, he ordered a second scan of the asteroid belt. The results came back unclear. There was something out there, but the scanners could not identify it. It was too spread out, too diffuse, too strange. Voshan stared at the data for a long time. Then he set it aside and returned to his other work. It was probably nothing. These primitive creatures could not possibly have built anything worth worrying about. On day 85, Arbiter Voshan gave the order to move the fleet into final position. 10,000 warships. Each one was a kilometer long, built from metals that did not exist naturally, powered by engines that burned captured starlight. Each one carried enough firepower to crack a planet's crust like an eggshell. They moved through space in perfect formation, a wall of death stretching across millions of kilometers, closing in on Earth and every human colony at the same time. The Concordance's military commanders had done this before. They had a schedule. They had procedures. On day 88, they would send a final demand for surrender. On day 89, they would begin charging weapons. On day 90, if the humans had not complied, they would open fire and keep firing until there was nothing left to shoot at. The whole thing would be over in less than a day. That was the plan. Secretary General Adaizi Okafor broke the plan on day 85. She appeared on every screen on Earth at exactly noon, Greenwich Mean Time. But this broadcast was different from the ones the Firal had been intercepting for the past 3 months. This one was real. "People of Earth," she said. "People of Mars, of Europa, of Proxima, of every colony and station and ship that carries human beings. I have something to tell you, and I need you to listen carefully." She paused. The world held its breath. "For 85 days, we have put on a show. We have cried and begged and argued in front of cameras. We knew the Firal were watching. We wanted them to see a species that was falling apart. We wanted them to see fear and division and weakness. We wanted them to look at us and see what they have always seen when they look at species they are about to destroy. Helpless animals, waiting for the end." Her eyes were steady. Her voice did not waver. It was a lie. All of it. Every tear, every shaking hand, every panicked speech. While we performed, we prepared. For 85 days, the best minds our species has ever produced have been working in secret, building something that the Concordance has never faced before. Not a fleet, not a weapon, something better. She leaned forward. "They told us that nothing can stop what comes next." They were right, but they were talking about themselves. Nothing can stop what comes next, and what comes next is us. The broadcast ended, and Prometheus woke up. The swarm activated first. In the asteroid belt, trillions of nanoscale machines that had been building in silence for months suddenly moved together as one. They did not fly toward the Thyral fleet. They did not form into weapons or ships. Instead, trillions of tiny minds linked together across thousands of kilometers of space. And in the span of 30 seconds, they became the largest computational network ever created by any species in the history of the galaxy. Then they reached out. Every ship in the Thyral fleet ran on the same system. The Concordance had used the same quantum communication network for 400,000 years. It was elegant, it was efficient, and it had never been attacked, because no species had ever been clever enough or desperate enough to try. The swarm did not attack it with viruses or malware. It did something far worse. It flooded the network with data. Specifically, it flooded it with memories. The historical records of every species the Concordance had ever destroyed. Not just dry facts and numbers, but everything humanity had recovered from the Echoes project. Final transmissions, last words, images of cities burning, the songs of the Vilhari as their worlds died. Every crew member on every Thyral ship who was connected to a neural interface received it all at once. For the first time in their lives, they did not just know about the Silence Protocol. They experienced it. They felt what it was like to be on the other side. They felt what it was like to watch their world burn, to hold their children and know that no one was coming to help, to scream into the void and hear nothing back. 10,000 ships went silent. Soldiers dropped to their knees. Officers tore their neural interfaces from their heads, but the memories were already inside them. Some wept, some vomited, some simply sat down and stared at nothing. And while the fleet reeled, the mirror activated. Humanity's improved FTL communication system fired a single pulse that traveled instantly to every corner of the galaxy. Every species in the Concordance, all 4,000 of them, received a data package at the same moment. It contained everything. Proof of 311 extinctions. Records of the Thyral Dominion lying to its allies. Evidence that the Silence Protocol had never been about protecting the galaxy from dangerous species. It had always been about one thing: eliminating any species that might one day challenge Thyral power. The galaxy had believed the Thyral were protectors. Now they knew the truth. The Thyral were gardeners, and they had been pulling out every flower that grew too tall. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had trusted the Concordance for generations read the data and felt something cold settle in their stomachs. On the Galactic Forum, Representatives who had laughed at humanity 5 days ago now sat in stunned silence. And then, the signal got an answer. From beyond the borders of known space, from the regions the concordance had sealed off and forbidden anyone to approach, something responded. It was not a message in any language. It was a pulse of energy so vast that every sensor in the galaxy detected it. Something was coming. Something enormous. Something old. On the Firal command ship, Arbiter Vashan received all of this information in the span of 3 minutes. The fleet was in chaos, the concordance was in shock, and something was approaching from beyond the galactic border. He stood on his bridge and felt an emotion he had not felt in 8,000 years. He did not have a word for it, because he had never needed one. The closest human word would have been dread. But Vashan was Thyral, and the Thyral did not break. He seized direct control of his flagship's weapon systems and overrode the safety protocols. If the fleet would not fight, he would fight alone. He opened fire. The first blast hit Earth's primary orbital defense station. The station was called the Aegis, and it had been built in secret over the course of 20 years. It was not large by galactic standards. It was not elegant. It was ugly and heavy and covered in weapons that looked like they had been welded together by desperate people in a hurry. That was exactly what had happened. The Aegis took the hit and survived. Its shields were not Thyral shields. They were based on technology developed by a species called the Dravani, who had been exterminated 14,000 years ago. The Dravani had figured out how to bend energy around a structure the way a river bends around a rock. They had never had a chance to use it in battle. Humanity finished their work and built it into the Aegis. The station fired back. Its weapons were not human either. They were based on designs recovered from 3 different dead civilizations, combined and improved by human engineers who had spent years figuring out how to make pieces from different puzzles fit together. The result was a beam of focused gravitational force that hit Vashan's flagship like a fist made of collapsed stars. The flagship shuddered. Its armor cracked. Vashan stumbled and grabbed the edge of his command console. More human stations opened fire. Ships that had been hidden in the debris fields around Earth's orbit emerged and attacked. They were small and fast, and they moved in patterns that no concordance tactical program could predict, because the patterns were based on the combat strategies of 6 different extinct species, layered on top of each other and filtered through human creativity. The battle was brutal and short and terrible. Vashan's flagship fought alone. The rest of the fleet was still paralyzed, its crews broken by the memories that had been forced into their minds. Mutinies broke out on dozens of ships. Species that had been conscripted into the Thyral Armada turned on their commanders. Earth took damage, terrible damage. A section of the Aegis was destroyed. 2 orbital platforms were shattered. Debris rained down on the planet below. Millions of people died in the cities that were hit. The cost was real, and it was heavy, and no one who survived would ever forget it. But the flagship was crippled. Its engines failed. Its weapons went dark. It drifted, burning, above the planet it had come to destroy. And then every sensor in the system detected it. Human sensors, Thyral sensors, concordance sensors on ships that were no longer sure whose side they were on. All of them picked up the same reading at the same time. Something was entering the solar system. Something that was not a ship, not a fleet, not anything that any known database could identify. It was vast. It moved through space the way light moves through glass, bending the darkness around it. On the ruined bridge of his flagship, Vashan pulled himself upright. Blood ran from a wound on his head. One of his golden eyes was swollen shut. He looked at the sensor readings with his remaining eye, and he understood what he was seeing. For the first time in 8,000 years, the arbiter of the Thyral Dominion felt fear. "What have they done?" he whispered. Outside, the stars seemed to shift as something ancient and enormous settled into the space between worlds. The darkness was no longer empty. Something had answered humanity's call. The thing that arrived was not a ship. It had no hull, no engines, no weapons that anyone could see. It looked like a fold in space itself, a place where the fabric of reality had been creased and shaped into something that almost resembled a structure. Light bent around it. Stars behind it appeared to stretch and shimmer as if seen through deep water. It was hundreds of kilometers across, and it hung in space with the stillness of something that had been still for a very, very long time. Every weapon system in the Thyral fleet that was still operational turned toward it. Targeting systems locked on. Commanders who had been reeling from the memories forced into their minds now found something solid to focus on, something they could shoot at. Several ships opened fire without waiting for orders. The weapons hit nothing. Beams of energy and clouds of projectiles passed through the structure as if it were not there. It did not dodge. It did not deflect. The attack simply did not reach it. They faded into the folded space around it and disappeared, like sound swallowed by fog. The structure did nothing in response. It did not fire back. It did not move. It simply existed, and its existence was enough to stop every gun in the system from firing again. There was something in the way it sat there, patient and immense, that made violence feel pointless, like throwing rocks at the ocean. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound. Every sapient being in the solar system, human and alien alike, felt something press gently against their thoughts. It was not painful. It was not invasive. It was like a door opening in a room they did not know they had. Through that door came understanding. They called themselves the Architects. They were not a species, not in any way that the word was normally used. They had once been biological, millions of years ago, so long ago that they no longer remembered what their original bodies looked like. They had evolved beyond flesh, beyond machine, beyond any category that the Concordance had a name for. They existed as patterns of thought woven into the structure of space itself. They did not live in the galaxy. They lived in the spaces between things, in the folds and curves of reality that most species never learned to see. They were older than the Concordance by a margin so large it was difficult to think about. They had existed before the Thyral had learned to use fire. They had watched the first civilizations rise and fall in the galaxy's core, while they drifted in the quiet dark between stars. And they had been locked out. 600,000 years ago, when the Thyral Dominion first rose to power, they discovered the Architects. The Thyral were strong and ambitious and afraid of anything they could not control. The Architects were none of the things the Thyral valued. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They held a single belief that the Thyral found intolerable, that all sapient life had the right to exist and grow without interference, that no species, no matter how powerful, had the authority to decide which others should live and which should die. The Thyral could not destroy the Architects, so they sealed them away. They built barriers at the edges of concordant space, not physical walls, but fields of distorted space-time that blocked the Architects from reaching inward. The Architects could have fought. They had the power. But fighting would have meant becoming the thing they opposed, and so they chose to wait. They waited for 600,000 years. They listened. They heard the screams of 311 species as they were exterminated, one after another, across millennia. They heard the songs of the Vilhari fade into nothing. They heard the last transmissions of civilizations that begged for help that never came. They could not reach through the barriers, but they could listen, and they remembered everything. Then, 7 years ago, they heard something new. A signal, clumsy, crude, fired from a primitive array, at the edge of a small solar system. It was not elegant. It was not sophisticated. It was, by architect standards, the equivalent of someone banging on a locked door with their fists. But it was the first time in 600,000 years that anyone had knocked. Many species had tried before. The architects had felt their signals, faint and desperate, reaching toward the borders. But every one of those species had been destroyed before they could finish the call. The concordance was efficient. It killed the clever ones before they could become dangerous. Humanity was the first to survive long enough to complete the transmission. And so, the architects answered. Secretary General Okafor stood on the bridge of a human shuttle and looked at the structure through the viewport. It filled the sky. Behind her, Ambassador Asante and a small team of scientists and diplomats sat in silence, each of them struggling with the gentle pressure of the architect's thoughts against their own. "They want to meet us," Okafor said. The shuttle flew into the structure. There was no docking bay, no entrance. The shuttle simply passed through the outer surface and found itself in a space that should not have existed. It was vast and quiet and filled with a soft light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The laws of physics felt different here, not broken but bent, like walking through a room where the floor was slightly curved. The architects communicated through direct meaning, not words, not images, but pure understanding, placed gently into the minds of the humans present. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. They showed Okafor and her team what they had seen over the centuries. They showed them the galaxy as it could have been, a place where thousands of species grew and learned and traded and argued and created, where diversity was strength and difference was celebrated. They showed them the galaxy as it was, a garden trimmed by the Thyral's shears, with every tall flower cut down and every bright color dulled. And then they told the humans something that made Okafor's breath stop in her chest. "We have watched many species fight the concordance," the understanding came. "Some were stronger than you, some were smarter, some had technology far beyond anything you have built. All of them failed. Do you know why you succeeded where they did not?" Okafor waited. "Because you carried the dead with you." The architects had seen what humanity had done with the Echoes project. They had seen humans spend decades tracking down the lost knowledge of 11 destroyed civilizations. They had seen human scientists sit in dark laboratories, piecing together the broken dreams of species they had never met, learning their languages, understanding their cultures, finishing their unfinished work. They had seen humanity go into battle, carrying weapons and shields and ideas that belonged to people who no longer existed. The architects called this the remembering, and they considered it the highest thing a sapient mind could do. Not just fighting for yourself, but fighting for the memory of those who could no longer fight. Not just surviving, but carrying others forward with you. "That is why we answered your call," the understanding said. "Not because you are strong, not because you are clever, because you remembered." Outside the structure, the galaxy was changing. The data humanity had broadcast was spreading through the concordance, like fire through dry grass. Species that had been loyal to the Thyral for thousands of years were withdrawing their support. Alliances that had held for millennia were breaking apart in hours. On dozens of worlds, governments were falling as populations learned the truth about what had been done in their name. The Thyral Dominion tried to rally its remaining allies, but its power was crumbling. Voshin was deposed by his own officers, dragged from his ruined bridge, and placed in a holding cell aboard a ship crewed by a species he had once considered beneath his notice. Ambassador Asante went to see him. He walked through the corridor of the brig and stopped in front of a cell that was far smaller than the grand chamber where they had first met. Voshin sat on the floor. His cracked skin was gray. His golden eyes were dim. "How did you know?" Voshin asked. His voice, was quiet. "How did you know to look for the architects?" Asante looked at him for a long time. "We did not know what we would find," he said. "We did not know if anything was out there at all. We just knew that a galaxy that punishes life for existing had to be broken, and we refused to die without trying to break it." Voshan said nothing. Asante turned and walked away. The architects made their offer the next day, not to humanity alone, but to every species in the galaxy. A new order, a new compact, no more silence protocols, no more extinctions, no more fear. But they had one condition. Someone had to lead it. Someone had to stand at the center of the new galaxy and hold it together, while the old structures fell away and new ones grew in their place. They chose humanity. Not because humans were the strongest, not because they were the wisest, because they were the ones who had carried the memory of the dead into battle, and still chosen to reach out a hand rather than make a fist. Okafor stood on the bridge of her shuttle as it returned to Earth. She looked out at the stars through the viewport. Each one was a sun. Around each sun were worlds. On those worlds were billions of beings who were now looking to her species, the loud little apes from the edge of the spiral arm, for leadership. The weight of it settled onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She felt it press down on her, heavy and real. She straightened her back and bore it. 6 months after the battle, Earth was still bleeding. The scars were visible from orbit. Where the Thyral flagship's weapons had hit, great patches of brown and gray interrupted the blue and green of the planet. Cities that had stood for centuries were now fields of rubble. The death toll had been counted and recounted and revised upward 3 times. The final number was 4.2 million people. Each one had a name. Each one had been someone's child. Secretary General Okafor kept a list. Not the official casualty reports, which sat in files on her desk, but a personal one. Every morning, before she began her work, she read 10 names from the list. She read their ages and where they had lived, and when the information was available, what they had been doing when they died. A teacher in Lagos who had been leading her students to a shelter. A doctor in Buenos Aires who had refused to leave his patients. A girl in Mumbai, 9 years old, who had been holding her mother's hand. Okafor read their names because it was important to remember that the victory had cost something. The galaxy was calling humanity heroes. News broadcasts across 4,000 star systems were telling the story of the small, brave species that had stood up to the Thyral Dominion and changed the course of history. Songs were being written about them. Monuments were being planned. But monuments did not bring back the dead, and songs did not rebuild cities. Okafor knew this, and she made sure everyone around her knew it too. The Compact of Remembered Worlds was born on a cold Thursday morning, 6 months and 3 days after the battle. The founding ceremony was held aboard a new station built in orbit above Earth, constructed from a combination of human engineering and materials donated by 30 alien species who had been among the first to leave the Concordance. The station was called the Hall of Names, because carved into every wall, every floor, every surface of the building, were the names of the 311 species that the Concordance had erased from existence. Not all the names were complete. Some species had been so thoroughly destroyed that only fragments of their language survived. For those species, the best reconstruction available was used, followed by a small symbol that meant incomplete. It was a promise. The work of remembering was not finished. It might never be finished, but it would never stop. Representatives from over 200 species attended the founding ceremony. Some came out of genuine hope. Some came out of curiosity. Some came because they were afraid of what would happen if they did not. The galaxy was in chaos. The Concordance had been the only governing structure most species had ever known, and without it, old rivalries and new fears were bubbling to the surface. There were border disputes. There were threats. There were species that had been held in check by thyral power for so long that they did not know how to behave without it. Okafor did not pretend that the compact would solve all of these problems. She was not that kind of leader. She stood at the podium in the Hall of Names and spoke plainly, the way she always did. "I am not here to tell you that everything will be easy," she said. "It will not. The galaxy we knew is gone. The one that will replace it does not exist yet. We have to build it, and building is harder than destroying. It always has been." She paused and looked out at the gathered representatives. Beings of every shape and color and size looked back at her. Some had eyes. Some had sensory organs she could not identify. All of them were listening. This compact is not an empire. It is not a dominion. It will not tell you what to think or how to live or who you are allowed to become. It exists for one reason: to make sure that what the Concordance did can never happen again. No more silence protocols. No more extinctions. No more erasing a species from existence because someone decided they were inconvenient. She straightened the papers in front of her, though she did not need them. She had memorized every word. "I am going to read some names now. I ask you to listen." She began reading. 311 names. Some were short and sharp. Some were long and musical. Some were sounds that her human voice could not properly make, and she did her best anyway. For each name, she gave the date of extinction, and the reason the Concordance had given for enacting the Silence Protocol. Territorial expansion, technological advancement, biological incompatibility, cultural resistance. The reasons were different. The result was always the same. It took her 47 minutes to read all 311 names. The hall was silent for every second of it. When she finished, she looked up. "These are the names we know," she said. "There may be more that we do not. The compact exists so that no name is ever added to this list again." In the weeks that followed, the work of building the new galaxy began in earnest. It was messy and frustrating and full of arguments. Humanity discovered that leading a galactic civilization was nothing like leading a species. Every decision had consequences that rippled across thousands of worlds. Every policy had to account for species with different biologies, different values, different concepts of time and space and morality. Some humans wanted dominance. They argued that humanity had earned the right to rule, that the galaxy owed them a debt. Okafor shut this down quickly and firmly. "We did not fight the Thyral so that we could become them," she said in a closed meeting that was later leaked to the press. "The moment we start treating other species the way they treated us, we lose everything we fought for." Some alien species did not trust humanity. They had watched the humans deceive the Thyral with their performance of weakness, and they wondered what else humanity might be willing to fake. Okafor could not blame them for their suspicion. Trust was not something you demanded. It was something you built, slowly, through action, over time. The remembering became more than a project. It became a movement. Across the galaxy, species that had never heard of the exterminated civilizations began studying them. Universities were founded to reconstruct their languages. Museums were built to display what remained of their art. Scientists worked to understand their technologies, not to use them as weapons, but to honor what had been lost. On a small moon orbiting a gas giant in a system that had once belonged to the Vilhari, it played recordings of Vilhari songs, recovered from fragments of data that humanity had found drifting in the wreckage of their last city. The songs were incomplete and distorted by time, but they were beautiful. Visitors came from hundreds of light years away to listen. The architects departed quietly as they had arrived. Before they left, they spoke one last time to Okafor, pressing their meaning gently into her thoughts. "We have a gift for you," the understanding came. "Not a weapon, not a machine, a warning." They showed her the universe as they saw it, not just the Milky Way, but what lay beyond it. The spaces between galaxies, vast and dark and not entirely empty. Other civilizations existed out there, older than the architects, stranger than anything the galaxy had ever known. Some were kind, some were curious, some were patient, and some were hungry. The Concordance's isolation had not been entirely without purpose. The Thyral had sealed the borders, not just to control the galaxy, but because they were afraid of what lay beyond it. Now those borders were open. The galaxy was exposed in ways it had never been before. "You must be ready," the architects told her. "Not today, not tomorrow, but someday, something will come from the dark between galaxies, and when it does, this galaxy must be strong enough and united enough to face it." Okafor absorbed this. She did not flinch. She had long since passed the point where she could be frightened by large problems. She simply added it to the list of things that needed to be done and moved on. Vashan, the deposed arbiter, was given a choice. He could live in exile on a world at the edge of settled space, comfortable and forgotten, or he could serve. To the surprise of nearly everyone, he chose service. He asked to be assigned to the Memorial Division, the branch of the Compact responsible for reconstructing the histories of the species the Concordance had destroyed. When the officer processing his request asked him why, Vashan was quiet for a long time. "Your species taught me something I did not think I could learn after 8,000 years, he said finally. "You taught me that memory is heavier than guilt and far more useful." He began his work the next day. He started with the Vilhari. Months passed. The compact grew. It stumbled and corrected itself and stumbled again, the way all new things do. It was not perfect. It was not even close to perfect. But it was alive, and it was trying. And that was more than the Concordance had ever been. On a quiet evening, Ambassador Kofi Asante stood on the observation deck of the Hall of Names. Earth hung below him, scarred but green, hurt but healing. The stars stretched out in every direction, more of them than any human could count in a lifetime. A young alien diplomat approached him. She was from a species that had, 6 months ago, voted to support the Thyral's plan to destroy humanity. She was small, with iridescent skin and large dark eyes that blinked nervously. She had been assigned to the Compact as part of her government's effort to rebuild relations with Earth, and she was clearly terrified of the human she had been told to speak with. "Ambassador Asante," she said. Her translator made her voice sound thin and uncertain. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Are humans truly as dangerous as they say?" Asante looked at her. He thought about Okafor reading the names of the dead. He thought about the engineers on Europa who had spent their lives building machines they hoped would never be used. He thought about the scientists who had sat in dark rooms, learning the languages of extinct civilizations, carrying their knowledge forward so it would not be lost. He thought about the 9-year-old girl in Mumbai who had been holding her mother's hand. He smiled. It was a warm smile, but there was something behind it. Something old and deep and unbreakable. "More," he said, "but not in the way you think." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and something in her dark eyes shifted. Not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. They stood together on the observation deck and watched the stars. Below them, Earth turned slowly in the dark, carrying 7 billion people who had been told they were going to die, and had decided, with the stubbornness that was written into every cell of their bodies, that they simply would not. The galaxy had given Earth a final warning. It had told humanity that nothing could stop what comes next. It was meant as a threat. Humanity heard it as a promise, and they kept it.